Donald Trump caves yet again as MAGA Mike Johnson and MAGA Senate Leader John Thune instantly abandon Washington, D.C. and head for their 2-week recess. Yep, as America, because of Donald Trump, is in this disastrous war against Iran, Congress has decided yet again under Republican leadership it's vacation time, a 2-week recess from late March into early April, where Congress will not be working in Washington, D.C. But right before this recess took place, the official time when Senate declared their recess was 12:26 a.m. Donald Trump caved when it comes to funding TSA. And as has now been exposed over the past 12 hours, and the MeidasTouch network has been reporting on this, though, over and over again, hat tip to our Washington, D.C. bureau, Scott McFarland and Pablo Manriquez, Donald Trump always had the power, if he wanted to fund TSA, and he's been refusing to do it, to intentionally inflict pain and suffering on TSA, to create long lines in the airports in order to then try to blame it on Democrats. I want to be very clear that Donald Trump is now utilizing executive order power to fund the TSA agents, which just shows you he could have been doing this for weeks now, but he decided to use the TSA agents as a pawn. I'm going to show you specifically how he did that, but also there should be legislation that's passed beyond Donald Trump's executive order. There should be legislation that's passed. Democrats have consistently introduced legislation to fund the TSA, and Donald Trump has told the MAGA Republicans block it at every turn unless Democrats agree to fund ICE and Border Patrol, which they're already funded to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. And Democrats are like, we don't need to give them any more money. They already have hundreds and billions of dollars. And if you want more funding than what they already have, then they got to remove their masks and use actual search warrants and agree not to show up at polling stations for the midterm elections and identify themselves. Pretty basic things, right? So via executive order, late on Thursday, Donald Trump posts the following message. This was yesterday evening. Donald Trump posts, "The radical left Democrats and their leader, crying Chuck Schumer, have made it very clear." Wow. Let's go to the point. "Because the Democrats have recklessly created a national crisis." This is the important part. "I'm using my authorities under the law to protect our great nation, as I always will do. Therefore, I'm going to sign an order instructing the Secretary of Homeland Security, Mark Wayne Mullen, to immediately pay our TSA agents in order to address this emergency situation and to quickly stop the Democrat chaos at the airport." It's not a Democrat chaos. You've always had the ability to fund it, apparently, as you just are admitting right now. And this is what should be passed in legislation. It should just be the TSA. No more funding for ICE and Border Patrol, Gestapo, who are killing, terrorizing, and torturing people on the street. Donald Trump goes on to say, "It's not an easy thing to do, but I'm going to do it. I want to thank our hardworking TSA agents and also ICE for their incredible help they've been giving us at the airports. I will not allow the radical left Democrats to hold our country hostage any longer. Thank you for this attention to this matter. Donald J. Trump." So as we wrote on MeidasTouch accounts, so Trump just admitted that he has been using the TSA as pawns and could have paid them the entire time, as he's just doing there right now. By the way, this, as I said, it shouldn't be done by executive order. It should be done by an actual law. It should be legislation that becomes a law. And it should also be noted that we're still in a partial government shutdown because last night, the Senate didn't agree to any actual legislation before they went on recess. So that's been tabled for another 2 weeks or indefinitely, regarding, whether or not there is a broader funding package. But at least as of now, Donald Trump, by this executive order, saying he's paying TSA, and apparently this money is coming from other money that was set aside for ICE and for other things. And so I prefer that this money set aside for ICE is going to TSA agents. So at least there's that. I do want to give a hat tip to our our reporters on the Hill, Pablo Manriquez, Scott McFarland, doing great work. Just so you recall, the MeidasTouch network was one of the first to report about this power that Donald Trump, could potentially utilize via executive order to do this funding. Pablo Manriquez asked Senator Tillis about this earlier in the day before any of this went down. So let me give a hat tip to Pablo for his incredible reporting. Here's what Tillis told Pablo. Let's play it.
Senator, is it true that the Secretary or Interim Secretary of DHS could be paying TSA right now? Rosa DeLauro raised that point over House side.
That's one question we have. I think there is latitude to make the argument that they could.
Yeah.
And that may have to be a device that we use if we can't get to an agreement.
Got it. Thank you, Senator.
And then as the Senate and House is now going into recess, vacationing, leaving, abandoning Washington, D.C., yet again, let me show you what MAGA Mike Johnson was saying. It's pretty pathetic stuff right here. MAGA Mike Johnson spending his time interviewing with state regime media, which calls itself Fox. Interview with Bret Baier. Bret Baier says, so are you calling what's going on in Iran? Are you still calling it a conflict? Or will you agree that it's actually a war? To which MAGA Mike says it's only a conflict. But as Reed Galen explains, yeah, it's a war to the people fighting it and on the receiving end of missiles and drones. And there have been thousands and thousands of missions. Of course it's a war. Stop insulting our intelligence. Here, play this clip.
The war, you call it a war or a conflict?
Conflict.
Conflict needs to be over?
Yes, and I think it will be. I think it will be in due time, yeah.
And gas prices and inflation needs to come down.
Yeah, and those are directly related because you get the Iran conflict resolved, and I think that comes right back to planet Earth.
Mr. Speaker,
Next, MAGA Mike Johnson is asked by Bret Baier. There's all this talk about whether American soldiers will be invading Karg Island, and if they invade Karg Island, will there need to be authorization? Then I want you to watch what MAGA Mike Johnson says here in response. But here's the thing, too, that I want to talk about. Why aren't you working? I understand that Easter's coming up. I get it, but America is in a disastrous war. Why does Congress take a vacation? Why is MAGA Mike and John Thune once again abandoning D.C.? Just do your job. Work every day. Get congressional authorization. Utilize your Article 1 functions. What the hell is this? Here, play this clip.
There's all this talk about whether soldiers are going to take Karg Island or elsewhere. What do you say to lawmakers who say, if that happens, that definitely is when you would need AUMF, an authorization for the use of military force?
We'll have to see how it shakes out. The intention and the hope is that we're not going to have boots on the ground in that situation over there. I think we can get this resolved without it. I think the leaders of Iran need to take notice of this, the president's resolve and our ability. We have a buildup of troops there because we're trying to point that out to them, and I think it'll have the desired effect. It should not be necessary. I hope that it's not, and I hope this resolves soon. That's the desire of Congress, again, so we don't have to take further action. We're not yet to the 60-day mark of this operation. The president's well within his legal authority to do this. And he did it as a defensive strike because of an imminent threat, and that's what we had to do.
Well, that's important about the 60 days. I'm not saying that this is happening, but it's a possibility, an option for the president to consider.
And by the way, isn't it so fitting that MAGAs apparently have all the time in the world to do state regime Fox interviews, but are not actually working to help the American people? More from Bret Baier and MAGA Mike Johnson here saying, what do you make of MAGA Mike of Nancy Mace, a MAGA Republican from South Carolina, coming out of a classified briefing and seeming to reveal what may have been discussed about this operation? And MAGA Mike almost threatens her. You'll hear MAGA Mike's she shouldn't do that. That's against the law. I'm not necessarily saying, she broke the law for sure, but she maybe have broken the law. Here, play this clip.
I'm not saying that this is happening, but it's a possibility, an option for the president to consider. Sure. Congresswoman Nancy Mace came out of a classified briefing and seemed to reveal some of what was reportedly discussed about possible ground operations in Iran. There's people who ask, why should the administration brief Congress when Congress can't keep a secret? Are there any punishments for Congresswoman Mace in this instance?
Well, it is not lawful to leak classified information. I'm not suggesting that's what Nancy did there, but it is a problem. We had a big briefing for all House members in the Congressional Auditorium, and it's a lower level of classification because some of these things are so sensitive, and there is a breach of trust here. And that's a problem for the institution and something we need to address in the long run, because we've got to get back to these. Secrecy is important, especially at a time of international conflict.
Quickly, I want to talk about the midterms.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm looking at, all the people who have been on these huge lines, whether it was in DCA, Washington, D.C. airport, whether it was in EWR, Newark airport, whether it's at JFK's terminal, you see those lines there, whether it was, across the country, right? LaGuardia airport, all throughout the country, we've seen these massive lines, hours and hours and hours and hours. TSA agents were calling in sick. We were expecting that it could be as many as 50, 60% TSA agents this upcoming weekend calling in sick before recess. And ultimately, if you want to know, one of the things that I think moved the needle here is that because these senators and House representatives were taking a vacation, they themselves didn't want to, right? They themselves didn't want to be stuck on the lines. So as a result, you had a MAGA Republican Senator, John Kennedy, no relation to the actual Kennedys, from Louisiana, stating that he was going to do a unanimous consent motion, a UC, and that all the other senators would basically support his UC. Nobody would voice an objection to it. And then that would kind of pressure Trump because another Republican would be passing the Democratic bill. This is essentially what the Democrats said, fund the TSA only. And Republicans, I think they were like, well, we're about to take a vacation. We don't want to be stuck on these lines. So we got to pass this right now. I think that's what spurred this, as sick and deranged as that is. But if you want to see just how performative and disgusting MAGA Mike Johnson is, before Donald Trump announced that he would just be making the payments via an executive order, which means that Trump had the ability to do this all along, watch as MAGA Mike Johnson held a press conference like literally right before Donald Trump did the executive order announcement that he would fund the TSA himself. Watch MAGA Mike here play this clip.
Afternoon, everybody. We are quite frustrated right now. We keep saying that the coming election is about a contrast for America between common sense and crazy. And you just saw it on display here once again. For the third time now, almost every Democrat in the House, except for 4, voted against the bipartisan, bicameral Department of Homeland Security funding bill. It would reopen DHS and reopen and get our airports running again. And they did that for one reason, because they are trying to protect criminal, illegal aliens. That's what this entire debate is about. And there's no way for them to hide from that. And they keep putting votes on the board. I've suggested, and I suggested yesterday in a press conference, we should probably take this vote tally, blow it up on a poster, and put it at every airport terminal around America. The Democrats just voted for the third time to make you stand in those long lines and to jeopardize our country. You think of what's at stake right now. We have noted that the Department of Homeland Security is the 3rd largest department of the federal government. We have 10 agencies in DHS.
And then finally, before the news broke that Donald Trump would be doing this funding via an executive order, which again, he could have done weeks ago. And so it's an admission that Trump and the MAGAs did this to hurt the TSA agents, to hurt all of you who are traveling, to use you as pawns, to then blame the Democrats. By the way, while we're in a disastrous war in Iran, while people are suffering, living paycheck to paycheck, if they're lucky enough to get a paycheck here, while people are getting their health care ripped away from them by this disgusting Trump regime right now, right? While Donald Trump is out there, creating job recessions, inflation is surging, they're doing all that. But hat tip to Pablo Manriquez from the MeidasTouch network. This was his reporting yesterday as well. I'll show it to you. This was about 4 or 5 hours before Donald Trump announced what he was going to do. Watch how on top of it Pablo is. I'm so proud of our Washington, D.C. folks. Pablo and Scott and the whole team there. Thank you all for supporting the great work of the MeidasTouch network. Let's watch Pablo here play this clip.
If you are one of the millions of Americans who have been waiting long lines, hours of waits at airports that supposedly because of this DHS shutdown, well, I've got news for you. DHS, the Secretary of DHS, could have been paying TSA agents all along. This is a completely manufactured crisis, according to Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina, a Republican, and Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, a Democrat. So a Republican and a Democratic senator agree that TSA agents could have been paid all along by the Secretary of DHS using existing funds. So what does this mean? Basically, what's happening in the Senate right now is that there's sort of a debate going on as to whether or not Senator John Kennedy is going to introduce a unanimous consent request to fund just TSA. This would obviously mean ICE and Border Patrol, these incredibly controversial agencies that would not be included in this funding agreement, but TSA agents would be paid. But the irony about that unanimous consent request is that according to Tillis and Duckworth, it's completely unnecessary. Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen, the brand new secretary of DHS, could totally be paying TSA agents right now. Secret Service has been paid, ICE agents have been paid, Border Patrol agents have been paid, and TSA agents have completely not been paid, and that has been a choice. It has been a choice not to use existing funds to pay these agents, and as a result, Americans are suffering these long lines at airports. So watch this space, and please like and subscribe, even if you don't like this news. I know it's kind of, enervating. When you do like these videos, it definitely increases their visibility. And if you want to support my work, please do at migrantinsider.com. Thank you, fam, and stay safe out there.
There you have it, folks. Let me know what you think about this all. Now hit subscribe. Help us get to 7 million subscribers. We're so close to 7 million already. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to add the MeidasTouch podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts for new updates every single day.